What is up, everyone? Welcome to another edition of our NBA DFS DraftKings Picks videos, this time for Monday, November 8th. I am your host, Bales, here for an 8-game slate. We have a relatively solid Monday night, which has been the case throughout the majority of the season. Before we get started, it is time to shout out greatness. On the last podcast, I asked you guys how many points, real life points, not fantasy points, will Damian Lillard score? He ended up with 25 against the Lakers. And Scotty44, the first person on this entire time that we've been doing it, over a week. I don't actually have any idea how long I've been asking you guys, but it feels like a long time, and we have not hit it once. Scotty44, that is with a Y, not an IE. Just want to make sure everyone knows exactly who picked this perfectly. If you're watching, that was a fantastic job. We're going to keep doing this because essentially it is just a very fun way for us to kind of interact together. But I do want to make sure that we know 100% on the season that Scotty44 is the king of this game. He is the first person to nail how many points it was, and oddly enough, it was on Damian Lillard, who has been the most sporadic shooter in maybe the entire NBA thus far. So for tonight, with a larger 8-game slate, let's see who we have. Let's go with something really weird. In the comments below, let me know how many points you expect Frank Kaminsky to score. His game log, 217, 216. Important to note, DeAndre Ayton was out the two where he scored 17 and 16. DeAndre Ayton has already been ruled out for tonight's games as well. So in the comments, give your prediction for how many real-life points Frank Kaminsky scores. Also, if you enjoy the video, please go ahead and give us a thumbs up, and you can subscribe to the channel as well. If you want to make sure you don't miss anything, click the little bell to turn on the notifications, and it'll send you a notifications anytime a video is posted or we go live. So I just wanted to throw that out there as well. We can start, let's see, we'll start with injury news. Assuming that I get this loaded on my laptop. I had it loaded, it is closed out, but let's see what we have here. All right. So starting with the New York Knicks, Philadelphia 76ers. Obviously, the Sixers are going to be shorthanded again. No Ben Simmons, no Tobias Harris. Danny Green is questionable. Matisse Thybulle is out, and Isaiah Joe also ruled out on the other side. Kemba Walker did not play last night, and he is questionable as to whether he will play in this game. For Brooklyn, James Johnson and LaMarcus Aldridge are both questionable. Blake Griffin up to probable. D'Angelo Russell will be questionable tonight. Dylan Brooks and Killian Tilly both out, while Zaire Williams is questionable for Memphis. Herbert Jones and Brandon Ingram both questionable again for New Orleans. Maxi Kleber obviously will continue to miss time. Big one for the Denver Nuggets. Michael Porter Jr. has already been ruled out. We don't need to wait on the injury news of John Collins for the first time in what seems like forever. He is listed as probable, which suggests he will play tonight. Andre Iguodala has been ruled out for Golden State. As I mentioned before, DeAndre Ayton already ruled out for the Phoenix Suns. And then PJ Washington is expected to continue to miss time for Charlotte, while LeBron James and Kendrick Nunn are out, and Anthony Davis is questionable. One of the weirder things about Davis is that he started their last game and then got pulled pretty quick, I believe, but it was because he was sick, not because of an actual injury, and now apparently he's dealing with a little bit of a thumb injury, so it'll kind of be interesting to see where we're at with that. Unsurprisingly, that is literally the last game on the slate, 30 minutes after any other game at 10:30 p.m. So kind of puts us in a little bit of a weird position because we're going to be waiting on the Anthony Davis news most likely all day. I would assume at this point he is probably better from his illness, so I think we're probably just waiting on the thumb injury. And if I had to guess, I would say that most likely he plays in this game. But again, a lot can change from now. I'm recording this the night before to when the game starts. So starting at point guard, there are a lot of great options. I think relatively obviously, Russell Westbrook with no LeBron James, if Anthony Davis is also out, makes a lot of sense. At the very top, I think the one that I would prefer the most would probably be Luka Doncic, who has finally been playing significantly better. Over 50 fantasy points in 3 of his last 4. He obviously was feeling it against Boston when he called a game on that ridiculous shot to take it from a spot where it was going to go to overtime. They won by 3. As you move down a little bit, there are several options that I would consider. I think the number one for me would probably be Lamello Ball. Los Angeles has really struggled against point guards. Lamello Ball, we know, has a ton of upside because of the way that he can score. He comes with double-digit assist potential. He really has triple-double upside and can add blocks or steals essentially on any given night. So I do think that Lamello Ball is probably the top option there. Right after him, Chris Paul gets a really good matchup against Sacramento. Didn't play well the last time that he played Sacramento. Only played 30 minutes, ended with 29 fantasy points. But since then, he scored 40 plus in 4 straight. He is over 50 in one of those. And we know that the Kings really do struggle against guards. So I think that's a really good spot for him. As you continue down a little bit, it's tough to know exactly where you want to go, I guess, at this point. I think one guy that sticks out purely for his upside is Jordan Poole. Anytime he gets a plus matchup against any defense that really struggles against scorers, which obviously is exactly what Poole does, it puts him in a decent spot. Like his last game, he scored 26 points and ended with 30 fantasy points. He's really reliant on scoring, but he has such a large role in the Golden State offense at this point that it doesn't really matter. 2 games ago, he took 16 threes against the Charlotte Hornets. He put up 47 fantasy points in that game. So I feel like Poole at 5,800 is still a little bit too cheap. And then the guy that's just ultimately, it's a terrible pricing on DraftKings part, really, that it's just awful at this point. But at 5,200, Shake Milton, he scored essentially 37 fantasy points in 2 consecutive games. He's playing 30 plus minutes because everyone's hurt, and that's not changing tonight. Everyone is still hurt, basically. Shake Milton's going to get 30 plus minutes again. He'll probably sit in the mid-30s now that he's fully healthy, which is what he's been doing. And I mean, you can probably pencil in around 35 fantasy points, but even so, to hit value, he only needs around 25. So it's essentially a free square. You know, it's kind of weird to call it that, especially at 5,200, because a lot can happen to the point where he doesn't hit value. But it's just so cheap for the way that he plays and how well he's been playing and the role that he's taking in the offense that it's tough really not to just plug him in. Another option, completely dependent on D'Angelo Russell, but if Russell is out, Patrick Beverley's way too cheap. And then you have a guy like Alex Caruso, who also at 4,200 is better than where he was last time at 39, but still a bit too cheap for how much he's playing, especially in a matchup against Brooklyn. So we have a lot of really good options. There's a lot of games that I really do like on this slate, so that kind of makes it a little bit tougher to break down only a few guys. As we continue, I think if you want to use like Devin Booker at the top of shooting guard, 100% viable. He played extremely well against Sacramento in their first game. He's coming off a pair of really good games, and obviously they don't have Ayton, not that he has a massive offensive game or anything, but it gives Booker a few more looks. So I think that he does make a lot of sense. He's probably one of my top options at shooting guard. Buddy Hield is another guy that sticks out. very reliant on scoring. He's kind of like Jordan Poole in that aspect, but he does have the ability to add a few rebounds, some assists, steals on any given night. It's just that you can't really trust him for them. The big thing is that Phoenix is arguably the worst three-point defense in the entire NBA. In his last game, he took 17 threes. Before that, he took 10. 2 games before that, he took 12. I think the lowest amount that he's taken in any game this season is 7. And more often than not, he takes double-digit 3 attempts. So you can really just think that he's going to continue to just kind of throw the ball up as much as he wants. And I feel like at 6,000, when you have that type of upside in this type of matchup where you know that their three-point defense isn't good, it's always a viable play. Moving down a little bit, you have Seth Curry coming off of a terrible game. Prior to that, though, he flashed, and he still does come with plenty of upside at 5,800 just because there's no Tobias Harris, there's no Ben Simmons. It's Joel Embiid as the number 1, and then a bunch of guys that have the ability to score, but realistically on any given night, Seth Curry can completely take over as the number 2 and have no issues about it. Of him and Shake Milton, I much prefer Milton, but 5,800 isn't really putting him out of my price range or anything. Derrick Rose, I think, is someone that should be mentioned. It's a tough matchup on paper against Philly, but obviously they don't have some of their best defenders, so I'm not overly worried. If Kemba Walker's out, Derrick Rose is way too cheap, even though he didn't necessarily dominate last night. He still put up almost 30 fantasy points, even though, he wasn't. I guess he played a big role in the offense, but not as big as a lot of people would have expected. So he's at least a reasonable salary relief option. But unlike point guard, where I feel like there's a bunch of guys that are down here that you can play really cheap, I feel like I probably want to get to the mid-tier at least at shooting guard. Moving to small forward, Luka is small forward eligible. I think that's completely fine. If you want to play someone like Kevin Durant, I don't have any issues with that. A guy that I do like, Harrison Barnes at 73. It's kind of weird because that feels expensive for someone like Harrison Barnes, but he's enjoying just a tremendous season with Sacramento, and he obviously gets the plus matchup against Phoenix, who have taken a pretty big step back this season. So I do think that Harrison Barnes is viable. RJ Barrett has been scoring extremely well. Take away his last game against Cleveland, shot 3 of 13. He still played 30 minutes, but prior to that, he scored 20 plus points in 5 consecutive. He scored 35 points in one of those, and those are real life points, not fantasy points. He scored, I believe, 33 plus and over 55 in one of them. That's 33 plus in 4 straight prior to the one from last night. So really good option there. I also think that there's some open options in Denver with Michael Porter Jr. out. That should open up some some shots for Will Barton at 5,500. I don't have any problems with that. I also don't have any problems with PJ Dozier. I think he played 22 minutes in their last game. My big issue with both of them is that they still get a matchup against Miami. So even though Dozier's super cheap, I should see 20 plus minutes. We're kind of at the spot where he gets those minutes against Miami, so it's not like I'm dying to get him into my lineup. It's just that I think that he's a good play. If it was in a better matchup, he might turn into somewhat of a must or something like that. But I don't necessarily think that you have to use someone like that tonight. 2 Philly options, Furkan Korkmaz and Georges Niang. I think both are viable. I think they'll make even better plays if Danny Green's out. Kind of dealing with the injuries, I think that Josh Hart at 5,000 is too cheap if Brandon Ingram and Herbert Jones are both out. Even if just Ingram's out, Josh Hart is a very viable option. I would probably knock him down a little bit if Herbert Jones is the only one of the 2 out, because obviously Ingram takes over significantly more of the offense, can do more defensively and everything. So I do think that he's in play, though. Continuing on, you have a few other guys. Desmond Bane continues to be a little too cheap. Kyle Anderson, also from Memphis, gets the matchup against Minnesota. He's a bit too cheap just for what he can do, especially kind of in the limited minutes. You see him play 23 minutes and he comes with near 30 fantasy point upside. It's just not something you see all that much, and he is only 4,200. Besides that, I mean, there's other guys down here that are super risky but come with enough upside. Duncan Robinson has the 3-point upside. You have Cam Reddish who can score off the bench, plenty of upside. DeAndre Hunter is going to get minutes, and if his shot's falling again, you have plenty of upside in that situation, but no one that really jumps out as a must play. And then obviously, PJ Dozier, I believe he's 3,200 tonight, makes a very viable option. If Anthony Davis is in and healthy, 100% fine playing him. Most people will probably watch this if they played Anthony Davis the other night, and they will say, absolutely no way am I playing that guy. He said he was healthy. He started the game. He played 7 minutes, and then he left. There's not that much you can do about it. He came into the game sick. They said he threw up 4 or 5 times before the game. He thought he sorted it out, went out, tried to play. He had to go back to the locker room. He was throwing up more. There's nothing you can do about it. That's why in DFS, in betting, you really have to have a short memory. You forget about it and move on. The 2 games prior to that, he scored 65 and 53. If he's going to go under owned because people are mad about what he just did the other night, and he gets a matchup against Charlotte, who I'm not overly scared of any of their bigs, at 10-2, I'll take 65 fantasy point upside any day of the week. It's a gross play. Yeah, sure. You're worried about it. He's relatively always injured. You kind of have to sit the entire night thinking to yourself, at what point in time does Anthony Davis re-injure himself and potentially leave the game? Yeah, it's all there, but we play tournaments to win a lot of money, and if people aren't going to play the best plays because they're worried about that kind of stuff, that puts us in a situation to win a lot of money, and that's kind of what really we're looking for. As you drop down more, DeMar DeRozan has been playing just absurdly well in recent games. He gets a solid matchup against the Brooklyn Nets. I'm not scared of anyone really on their defense. DeRozan has posted 40 plus in 4 straight, 50 plus in 2 of those. So I do think that he's a really good option. It's kind of weird that he's still only at 8,200. I feel like he probably should be a little bit more expensive, but I'm willing to take the plunge on him tonight. Carmelo Anthony, if Anthony Davis is out, Carmelo Anthony should start. They reported in his last game that if Anthony Davis was out prior to him actually starting, that if he was out, Carmelo Anthony would draw the start. So if Anthony Davis is out, I do believe that Carmelo Anthony is a more than viable option. I think the big thing at power forward is everyone knows where you're going for the cheap option. With DeAndre Ayton out, Frank Kaminsky's played big minutes in 2 games. In those games, he scored 32 and 35. It's very obvious he gets a great matchup against the Sacramento Kings. They struggle against centers. When JaVale McGee's not in the game, Frank Kaminsky slides over to center. He's the easiest play on the slate at the moment. He's not the wrong play. You're going to want to use him in essentially every league. And here might be a little known thing. Frank Kaminsky gets a revenge game against the Kings. And before anyone goes and just looks it up, and you see that Frank Kaminsky does not have any games under his belt for Sacramento, he played in 4 preseason games for them. He averaged 5.3 points in 7.6 minutes per game. So the dude barely played in preseason for the Kings. He dominated while on the floor. They cut him after 4. He never officially made the team. That's got revenge written all over it, because he's probably, I don't want to say embarrassed by the situation, especially at this point in his career. I highly doubt he cares even slightly, but the Kings essentially were saying that he's not even good enough to make the roster when he was scoring, almost 5 points in essentially 8 minutes in the preseason. So Frank Kaminsky might want this one a little bit more. If he doesn't matter. He's still going to destroy them. It's still probably the easiest play on the entire slate. So that's just kind of a fun little narrative to add in case anyone kind of says anything about it. At the top of center, it's super interesting because Nikola Jokic is essentially the best fantasy center in the league, and probably no one's even really that close to him. The problem is he gets a terrible matchup against the Miami Heat, who are the best in the NBA against centers. Bam Adebayo is just an absolutely elite defender. So you're going to need to decide whether you think that Jokic is good enough to play in this type of matchup, or if you want to move elsewhere. Me personally, I would move elsewhere. I think that Karl Anthony Towns is a really good option against Memphis. I think that Joel Embiid is a really good option against New York. Neither of them I'm overly concerned with for the matchup. And then obviously in between those two, you have Anthony Davis, who I already talked about. Jonas Valanciunas at 8,500, especially if Brandon Ingram is out. He gets a matchup against Dallas, who doesn't have anyone that's going to even come close to being able to guard him. They really struggle against opposing centers, and we've seen Valanciunas already start with some massive games. And I feel like he's one of the top options. With no DeAndre Ayton, I do really like Richaun Holmes in this matchup against Phoenix. He scored 35 against them last time out, but he only played in 29 minutes. He shot very efficiently. He posted a double-double with 12 and 12. 7,200 is finally getting his price tag where it should be, but it's still a little bit too cheap. Continuing down at center, you have Steven Adams, who his minutes are kind of all over the place depending on matchups, but I could see him playing around 30. And if that's the case, 4,500 is just a bit too cheap for him. I do think he comes with quite a bit of risk, but that's risk that I'm willing to take in this situation. And then the final option, also relatively easy to plug in, even though 4K is getting a little bit expensive. But JaVale McGee is going to play minutes in the high teens against Sacramento. The last time they played, he played only 14 minutes. He scored 21 fantasy points. So at 4K, it feels like he's no longer necessarily a must. But he's still too cheap for this particular matchup. So I do really like him without DeAndre Ayton in. And obviously, he's going to draw the start, or at least I would assume that he's going to draw the start. But that about does it. That's a lot of plays. Keep in mind, this is an 8-game slate, so there are a ridiculous amount of players, and I'm sure more injury news and everything is going to come up. So you can get into our free Discord, in which we'll go over all that throughout the day and stuff at chatdfs.com. The link is in the description. DFSkarma.com for all of our free articles. We also have premium articles, our player projections, ownership projections. There's a premium Discord as well, along with our core plays. That can all be found at dfskarma.com/pricing. Again, link is in the description if you need any of that. Once again, comment how many points you believe Frank Kaminsky scores tonight. On top of that, give the video a like and subscribe to the channel. Scotty44 is the king of this game. Someone please uncrown him, and let's see what happens. But until then, good luck tonight, and hopefully everyone wins big.